So, Ghislaine Maxwell has been found guilty, as many of you will already know, of sex trafficking. And I'm not entirely sure, but it seems she was guilty. She was found guilty on most of the counts. So, my question is, did Ghislaine Maxwell get a fair trial? This is my discussion. I don't think she got a fair trial at all. Do I think she's innocent? Absolutely not. I think she's guilty. I do think she's guilty. But I think this is a case of guilt by association. And I think that she didn't have a chance in hell of being found not guilty. I think she was already found guilty before she even set foot into a courtroom. And my issue with the whole thing, she didn't get a fair trial. That's the first thing. But if she's going to go on trial, then Prince Andrew in England should also be going on trial, because women have also testified, or not necessarily testified in court, but women have also said that he was part of this whole thing. So the fact that he's gotten off scot-free, to me, is an absolute disgrace. I think that Ghislaine Maxwell, I think there was a witch hunt out for her. I think that when Epstein, either he was murdered or he committed suicide, whatever, whichever way you think, I think that the authorities were looking to blame someone, and she was the scapegoat. And I'm not saying that her hands are clean. I'm not saying that she's not guilty. I'm not saying that she should not pay for what she did for her part. What I'm saying is she didn't get a fair trial. She was already presumed guilty before she set foot in a courtroom. And if she's going to go down, then Prince Andrew should also be going down. And the fact that he's a royal should not allow him to walk scot-free from all of this. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that being a man who is a part of the royal family should make you free of blame, free of wrongdoing. And I think it's an absolute disgrace how this case has been handled, and how Prince Andrew has been able to weasel his way out of this. He knew exactly what Epstein was up to, and I think he was involved in the whole thing. To the extent that he was involved, I'm not entirely sure. I can say the same thing about Ghislaine Maxwell. To the extent that she was involved, I'm not entirely sure. I think she's guilty. But I think the fact that Prince Andrew, women have come forward to say, he was part of this whole thing. The fact that he's been able to walk away and live his life peacefully, I think that's... it's a stunning reflection of how terrible the justice system is. There's one rule for the normal folk, and there's another rule for royalty. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell, she is a socialite, or at least she was a former socialite, and she came from a wealthy family. Her mum was of French descent, and her father was, I think, of continental European descent and Jewish. And she grew up in extreme wealth, and her family had many royal connections and many illustrious connections. And she grew up in one of the biggest estates in England. And when her father died, he was exposed and revealed to be a fraud. He was stealing from the pension fund of his own companies. And she, for a time, worked for her father. So when her father died, the entire family name was disgraced. And it wasn't long after her father died and he was exposed as a fraud that she fled to New York. And she fled right into the arms of another criminal. Her father was a criminal, and she fell right into the arms of another criminal. She had lost her wealth, I think. I think she'd lost her connections, her illustrious connections. She'd lost support from a lot of people, even though she had many other siblings. And he was a man who was Jewish. Her father was Jewish, so she's half Jewish. He was a Jewish man that was wealthy, that had many connections. Obviously, we know he was, he had connections to the royal family through Prince Andrew. He was a friend of Prince Andrew, and he could give her back the life that she'd lost, the status that she'd lost. And I think Epstein manipulated Ghislaine Maxwell. And I'm not saying that her hands are clean. I'm not saying that she shouldn't be responsible for her part in this whole thing, because she should. But I do think that this is a case where the scapegoat is the woman, and one man has escaped who is the head of, the architect of this whole thing, which is Epstein. He's the architect of this whole thing. He orchestrated all of this. He was in control. He was the one, pushing all the buttons. So he's escaped through murder or suicide. And then you have Prince Andrew. He's escaped because of who he is, because a normal person would have to answer to something. And all of the blame has fallen onto the woman, the vulnerable woman in the middle. And like I said, she doesn't deserve any excuses. And I'm not making any excuses for Ghislaine Maxwell. She deserves to go down. But she should not be the only person going down for all of this. And I don't think she got a fair trial. I think she was deemed guilty before she ever set foot in a courtroom. And I think this says a lot about our justice system. The justice system in America and many other places is just wrong. There's one rule for the royal family, there's one rule for the rich, and there's another rule for everyone else. And I think that's very, very damning.